video, we're going to talk about cancer. Cancer is any abnormal growth that is going to spread and invade. It is going to impact 1 in 3 individuals in their lifetime, and there are many, many different types, over 100, and they're found in different areas of the body. Breast cancer is a really common type of cancer. About 1 in 8 women will develop breast cancer, and there are higher incidences of breast cancer in wealthier areas like Connecticut and Marin County. If you can remember the cell cycle, where mitosis is just a small pie slice of the whole timeline of the cell cycle, the majority of a cell's life is going to be in interphase. And interphase has 3 phases, G1, S, G2. And what happens here is that there are these checkpoints. These checkpoints are to make sure that a cell is healthy enough and good to go before it can move on to the next step. So these checkpoints, I like to say that they're kind of like a DUI checkpoint. If you've never gone through a DUI checkpoint, or if you don't know what that is, sometimes the police will set themselves up on a busy street on a night like New Year's Eve, when people are partying a lot, and they check and they breathalyze every driver that passes through. And anybody who doesn't pass that breathalyzer, goes to jail or gets a DUI. And then anybody who does, they're good to go. These checkpoints are the same way. These are checking if cells are A-okay to go, or they will, not pass go, and they will undergo apoptosis, which is like cell suicide. They'll commit suicide. So they're checking to make sure that everything is okay. At G1, it checks for cell growth. At G2, it's checking to make sure that DNA got replicated correctly. So what we're trying to say is cell division is super controlled. You have to make sure that a cell is A-okay to move on, and only then will it be able to divide. So that's what the checkpoints are for. So imagine if, your homework, I told you your homework was to read chapter 12 and to copy all the text of chapter 12 and turn it into the next class. If you made 0 mistakes, you pass. If you make 1 or more mistakes, you fail. That's kind of what these checkpoints are. If there are any mistakes at all, they will fail, not pass go, and commit cell suicide. For you all as adults, your cells are not going through mitosis nearly as much as you did when you were growing. So most adults, most human cells are not continuously dividing. Instead, they are in a rest state. And this rest state is called the G0 phase. So it's kind of like, are they going to pass go, or are they going to go to a rest stop and chill and not continue to grow? Cancer is when cells continue on in the cell cycle even though they shouldn't. They're passing through those checkpoints, going unstopped, and allowed to continue on when they really shouldn't be because there are mistakes within the cell. They should be going into this rest phase, but for some reason, they continue on within the cell cycle. This is usually caused by changes within the body's own cells, mutations like we've been talking about, and we will discuss why cancer occurs in the second half of this. So this is an image of what cancer can look like. Uncontrolled cell growth. This example is showing you lung tissue. And so you can just see cells that are overgrown in the lung. And something that's happening here that's really dangerous is that the cells are traveling, if you can see. Our blood and our lymph are moving all the time, and they are kind of like a freeway for our cancer cells if they are able to get there. And that can make it really dangerous. So in normal cells, there is something called density-dependent inhibition. When, say for example, when you have a cut on your arm and you lose some of your skin cells will do mitosis, and they will continue to do mitosis until they reach a specific density, when they are able to touch other cells. When they are able to touch other cells and they can feel a specific type of density, they stop dividing. And so that's how your skin knows to overgrow when you cut yourself, but then it doesn't grow past that. It's not like you're growing, like excess skin after you cut yourself. Unfortunately, with cancer cells, they lose that density-dependent inhibition. They don't express that at all. And so even though the cells are touching each other, they still continue to divide. There's uncontrolled cell growth here. So why is cancer bad? This is an example of a tumor. And on one side, we have a really tight, enclosed tumor. It's not going anywhere. And then on the other side, you have a tumor that is spreading. And this is what a malignant tumor is called. Malignant tumors can be dangerous because they're moving around. Like that picture I showed you, if cancer cells can move around, they can possibly get into blood vessels and travel in our blood or in our lymph. And then maybe they can deposit themselves in places that are essential, like in your hearts or your blood vessels near the heart or the lungs or the liver. That's when it can be really dangerous, when your cancer actually moves somewhere that's, really important. So when cancer cells move from one place to another, that's called metastasis. So as you can see here, this is showing breast cancer. You can see the tumor on the left, and then it grows, and then on the right, it is metastasizing. It is going into our blood vessels and our lymph vessels, which is like moving fluid all throughout the body. And so it becomes dangerous because the tumor can move to another part of the body. If a tumor doesn't metastasize, you can live with a tumor. If it's not pushing on anything important, you can live with a tumor, and that's when a tumor is called benign. Like, it's not going to cause anything wrong. So one thing you need to do, and maybe you've heard of this, maybe you haven't, maybe you're young and you haven't had to worry about this yet, but your parents might, where you have to check your moles and make sure that they look like that first picture of a perfectly enclosed mole. If your mole has any of these characteristics where they have asymmetry, the border's funny, the color is not like one color, the diameter is abnormal, and it's changing, that's definitely something that you have to go see a doctor, because that shows that there is growth there. This is an image of lung cancer and liver tissue, and lung cancer or lung tissue feels very like spongy, whereas liver tissue feels really dense, so you can really tell the difference. With the development of cancer, there are multiple changes. First off, cells start to divide abnormally. Second, that density dependent inhibition is lost, where cells are not going to stop dividing once they touch other cells. And then if it continues to develop, and if maybe you've heard of like stage 4 cancer before, that can be really dangerous because then metastasis can occur. So maybe you have observed that cancer is way more common in people who are over the age of 50. And the older you get, the higher the rate of cancer gets. Why do you think this happens? So here just showing a graph of the correlation between cancer death rate and age. And when you're young, it's pretty rare, not to say it's not there. There are young people with cancer, but as you get older, it just skyrockets. The reason why this happens is mutations. Mutations occur the longer we're alive. Anything that causes mutations can cause cancer. So, review question, what can cause mutations? Errors in mitosis, meiosis, environmental factors, radiation, mutagens, viruses. And so, the longer you're alive, the more likely you're going to come into contact with these. And the longer you're alive, the older your cells are, the more likely they're going to produce errors in mitosis and meiosis. And so the longer you're alive, the more mutations that you're going to collect, because we live in cities, or we drive cars, or we eat meat, or we sunbathe, those are all possible mutation causers. Smoking is a good example of what can cause mutations. And this shows the correlation between lung cancer and cigarette smokers. And diet, meat consumption, and large intestine cancer is correlated as well. So the most common type of cancer in the US is breast cancer, number 1. And FYI, males can get breast cancer too. Prostate cancer, which is specific to males. Lung cancer, colon and rectum cancer, which is like that large intestine cancer we were talking about, due to diet. And then pancreatic cancer. The deadliest type of cancer, though, is lung cancer by far. Okay, so is cancer genetic? Let's assume that for a cell to become cancerous, there needs to be 5 mutations that happen to that cell. So, throughout life, maybe you will come into contact with those eventually, right? But say somebody was born with one of those mutations, as in their family has a mutation in their pedigree, and it was passed on from their grandparents or their parents. And so if that person was born with one of those mutations, they would only require 4 more to have a cell become cancerous. And so this is why some individuals are more predisposed to cancers than others. They can have 1 or more of the mutations that are necessary for that cancer cell to become cancerous. So, that is why some individuals might get cancer when they're younger, because it doesn't take as much time to come into contact with 2 mutations, or for your body to have 2 mutations rather than 5 mutations. So multiple mutations are required for cancer, and this is showing you colorectal cancer, for example. Here is 1 mutation, 2, 3, and then maybe another. And so this is showing you that it's not like just one change that can occur. This is a stepwise fashion, right? And this can occur because of genetics, if you receive mutations inherited, or this can occur from environmental factors. So your environment, if you come into contact with radiation, your diet, whether you smoke, whether you drink. So your your personal day-to-day life, your personal habits, your personal behaviors does impact this. Because if you're a smoker, that's definitely going to increase the likelihood of you getting mutations. Or if you eat meat every single day, that can also increase the rate of getting mutations. Compared to somebody who exercises every day or reduces their meat intake or never smokes, never drinks, that's going to impact their rate of receiving mutations. Here's an example. Retinoblastoma, which is cancer of the eye, it requires one mutation and it changes this one. And then it requires a second mutation and it changes this one. And then that person has cancer. So if somebody has it inherited, where they have hereditary retinoblastoma, they only need one single mutation for that retinoblastoma, for that cancer to arise, because they have already inherited one of those mutations. This was in the news where a mom figured out that her toddler had eye cancer by taking a photo of him and seeing like the difference in his retina. And so he had hereditary retinoblastoma. Breast cancer, about 10% of breast cancer can be tied to either BRCA1 gene or BRCA2 gene. And maybe you've heard of these before, BRCA1 and BRCA2. And I have a picture of Angelina Jolie on here because if you read in the news, she had a double mastectomy, which means she removed all her breast tissue. She didn't have breast cancer, but she had a high likelihood that she would get it. And so rather than wait to get it, she just went ahead and got a double mastectomy and removed her breast tissue and got breast implants. But of course, she is a privileged person with a lot of money, so she could do that. So the BRCA gene is inherited as a dominant trait, and cancer is multifactorial because it can be controlled by many genes. Specifically, breast cancer is controlled by 2 or more genes, as well as the environment. The mutagens you come into cross with, your diet, your personal behaviors. There is something called incomplete penetrance here, where even though an individual has the genotype, they may not always express the phenotype. So even though your genes say that you should have this cancer, it may not express itself, especially if it requires some action from the environment. It may not express itself ever, or it may take a while. So cancer tends to develop by the age of 70 in about 55 to 65% of women with the BRCA1 allele, or 45% of women with the BRCA2 allele. And so that means that there is a percentage of women with these alleles that don't get the cancer. So how is cancer treated? First off, you could just remove the tumor through surgery. As long as it's a benign tumor and it's not traveling anywhere too much, you can remove, the majority of it, if not all of it. If it's a malignant tumor or if it's metastasizing, you can remove some of it through surgery, but then you may need these other treatments to remove all of it, because now it's moving. It's a moving target. And, you can't go into surgery trying to remove tissue that's a moving target. So chemotherapy and radiation is great and all because they do target the cancer cells. However, they don't just target those. They're going to target any cells that do a lot of mitosis. So if you can think about this, what type of cells may be targeted by chemotherapy and radiation? Well, if you've ever seen how chemotherapy patients lose their hair, our hair is rapidly dividing, right? And so chemotherapy and radiation both are going to attack our hair cells and our skin cells, as well as our gastrointestinal, our digestive tract, which is why these chemo and radiation patients often feel really sick and nauseous. So radiation especially kills dividing cells, and it does this by damaging the DNA. It damages DNA by using radiation targeted at a specific place. But, it can impact the tissue around the treatment. Chemotherapy, on the other hand, uses chemicals, which is why it's called chemotherapy. But, when you use chemicals to treat cancer, it's going through your whole body. And so it's challenging for it to target only cancer cells. And so chemotherapy patients often feel really sick. Chemotherapy attacks dividing cells, for example, by blocking DNA synthesis in interphase. And most of our body cells are in that G0 phase. What's pretty awesome now, and what's kind of a new technology, is there's something called immunotherapy. And this is kind of giving us hope for, our generation and maybe next generation, my generation and your generation and onward. Immunotherapy is like a personalized treatment where they use your own immune system cells to fight cancer cells. And what's so awesome about this is that they are only attacking cancer cells. They are not going to attack any of your healthy cells. And so, you don't get any of those horrible side effects that you would get like with chemotherapy and radiation. You might have some side effects because this doesn't work. You always have side effects with everything, where you might get stuffiness, itchiness, redness, swelling, like inflammation, or flu-like symptoms because your immune system is kind of a little overactive. I will share I had a friend recently whose dad was diagnosed with cancer. He received immunotherapy and he's doing really well.